live according to that
If
message.
you can see us, guys, just chuck a comment in. Say if you've managed to tune back in and you can see us and everything is going as it should, just let us know. Just
bear with
standard
us.
technical dramas, I think, of trying to play with technology for the first time. It was going pretty well for a while there.
We were going well.
I'm surprised. Like, normally I'm worried about things going wrong with the brew, but I think the technology has become the new nemesis.
David's welcome back. Thank you, David.
Hey, thank you.
We're back on
Awesome.
Facebook. Sorry, YouTube. Hopefully we're back on Facebook as well. So guys, if anyone's watching on Facebook, let us know too.
Yeah.
But yep, good. Okay, sorry about that little glitch, but
we're all I don't know if you caught me before we had to go offline, but I think we're all familiar with we've been trying to do the working from home thing and using like what are they, like Microsoft Groups and Zoom and Jitsi and all these different things and trying to juggle it all. Things go wrong. Particularly because every single person in the country right now is also doing the same thing.
Just hit that midday kind of.
Everyone's a streamer at the moment, so the old copper internet infrastructure is under a bit more strain than maybe Mr. Internet was planning on when we went with that option. But yeah, basically what I was saying is looked for some hose. It was all smelly, so I chucked some in some OxyClean and hot water to clean up and get nice and ready. That should be sufficiently clean now.
Thanks, Rick.
It's been sitting in there for a few hours, so I'll quickly disappear off camera, tip it out, rinse it thoroughly, and then I have another jug next to that which is full of sanitizer, and I'll pop the hose in that. It only needs to be wet with the sanitizer in order for it to be effectively sanitized. So once the hose has gone in there, what I'll do is I will pour said sanitizer into our cube, and the cube will be sanitized also.
Yep.
So bear with me, I'll just quickly... Sorry, this is going to be a bit loud, guys.
I'll just turn you down there. Turn us both down, maybe. So we might have lost a few viewers there. Hopefully we'll get you back. Guys, keep sending your questions through. Have you got any, of course?
So basically, I don't want this to be slippery. So the good thing about OxyClean and most of those different alkaline cleaners is that they feel slippery to the touch. So if your hose is still slippery, it means it's still got the cleaner on it and you need to rinse it a little bit better. Once it's not slippery anymore, and you can have a smell as well.
It's like a slick kind of, isn't it?
If it doesn't smell like the cleaner anymore, you're pretty much good to go. So I'll put this in my little pre-prepared jug of sanitizer. Again, really important to just get everything ready to go before you start.
And that's an acid-based.
It's an acid-based sanitizer. It's the Stellar Sand that we sell. Star Sand is probably the most common one you'll read about on forums and stuff like that. Stellar Sand is very similar to that. The same sort of two main active ingredients. So that's enough now. It's wet with the stuff, which means that it's doing its job. There is a contact time of, say, 5 minutes that you want to hit, which is why I'm doing it now. And then I'll just pour this into the cube. Put the lid on. Give it a quick shake so that everything's coated. And this stuff is really frothy as well, so it's a good thing. Don't fear the foam, as they say. Don't fear the foam. If your beer ends up with the foam in it, it's not a bad thing. And then I'll just pour that back in. I'll put the lid in there too. And then I will position the cube upside down on top to drain. and just slide that out of the way. So that's just going to keep draining now while the boil's going. And when it comes time to use it, it'll be ready.
It's all done and ready, and yep.
So now would be a good time, I guess. What time is it actually?
11:39, 11:40.
11:39, 11:40. So we're going for 12 o'clock, was it? 12:05?
I don't know. It was the viewers.
It was 11:15, I think we said. We hit the boil. So we hit the boil 11:15. So 12:05, we're going to put in our nutrient and our fining agent, which means we've got plenty of time to talk about hops. So hops are a plant. Basically, it's effectively a weed. They, I think, what's it? Cumulus lupulus or something like that. Lupulus?
Oh yeah, right.
The Latin translation is wolf of the willows, which basically, because it would wrap around the willow trees and strangle them. It's like a vine that sort of climbs and wraps and tangles, and when it's sort of good to go, it flowers with these cones, like these sort of big buds of hoppy goodness, which we then pick and usually dry, often palletize, and throw into our beers. So it's the lupulin glands in the hops which produce most of the goodness, and it's a fairly inefficient, like one cone doesn't yield you very much sort of beer related stuff, like the stuff that you want, but it has a number of really useful uses has a number of really useful properties. So one of them being it has antibacterial properties. So that's a huge thing with beer. We're basically making a big old snack for whatever likes to eat sugar to hoe in. And that's by design necessarily, because we want the yeast to be able to have a big feed. But things that yeast like often are fairly similar to things that bacteria like. So by using hops, we're introducing some antibacterial qualities to it, which is going to make it less likely for bacteria to take hold and more likely for yeast to chew up the majority of the sugars. One of the other properties that hops have, which is fairly useful for brewing.
Sorry about the terrible resolution there. I just put a picture up.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so you know.
One of the other things that hops provide us, which is really useful for beer, is bitterness. For a long time, beer was flavored with a variety of different things as a way to try to balance the sweetness of the malt and of the sugars. So there used to be like something called Groot, which was a spice mix, which was really popular through medieval times. And at one stage, the church actually had full control over the supply of Groot. So if you wanted to make beer, you had to go and buy your Groot from the church. But it was actually a nun who first found the benefits of using hops to make beer. And once they sort of realized that the beers tended not to go bad and be of like a really high quality, pretty much across the board, hops became the standard flavoring. What's the word I'm looking for? Ingredient? Compound? Thing?
Yeah, well,
Herb, spice,
yeah,
and or other
yeah.
that was used in beer. And most modern beer styles kind of stem from that. So, and the types of hops that were available, the sorts of flavor contributions they were making, how much you use, when you use them throughout the boiling process, all of these things kind of have a massive impact on the end beer. So, you've probably heard of the term IBUs. Particularly if you're into hoppy beers like IPAs and stuff like that. So IBUs is international bitterness units or bittering units. I'm not sure exactly the way they frame that, but it's a precise measurement of of a certain compound in the beer. So one of the main things in hops which creates bitterness is alpha acids. Alpha acids are one of many things in hops, but when you buy a pack of hops, I don't have one handy to show you, but if you sort of
see if I can find.
if you buy a pack of hops from the store or from online or pretty much anywhere, it will list the alpha acid percentage by weight. So that means that if you've got a hop that, well, these Goldings that I've used in today's brew have an alpha acid of 4.7%, I think it was, which means that for every 100 grams of hops you use, 4.7 grams of alpha acids are going into your kettle or into your fermenter, depending on where you're using them.
I don't know if this is going to work. I'll see if I can pull this up here. The resolution probably is not very good, but you can see on our packs, there we've got the alpha acid. So this is Citra, and alpha acids are 13.3%. So that's sort of the number there you want.
So alpha acids aren't soluble in their normal form. So similar to how we had to take the barley through a process to make them usable, we've also got to process the alpha acids in order to make them able to dissolve into the wort and stick around in the finished beer. That process is called isomerization. Again, there won't be a test on this. You're not expected to remember any of these terms and names and labels and things like that. But isomerization is basically that process of taking the alpha acids in the hops and converting them into isomerized alpha acids, which makes them soluble, and they'll dissolve in the beer and stick around, so the beer will remain bitter instead of those compounds dropping out. IBUs is a measurement of the total amount of isomerized alpha acids within a specific volume of beer. So if your beer is, so say we throw in our 40 grams of East Kent Goldings hops at 4.7% alpha acid in there, that means that we've got a set amount of alpha acids that are going into the kettle, and we're boiling them for an hour. So over the course of that hour, at boiling temperatures, a certain amount of those alpha acids are going to be isomerized. If we end up with 20 litres in the kettle, which is what we're hoping to end up with, close enough to, then the IBUs is going to be a measurement of those isomerized alpha acids in that 20 litres of wort will give us the IBU number. So if we boiled it for longer and we ended up with, say, 17 litres, but we still used the same amount of hops and boiled for the same amount of time, the IBU will change because the volume is also important. So the amount of bittering compounds dissolved in the liquid stays steady, but the amount of liquid changes. The bittering is going to be different because there's going to be more bitterness for less beer. And it's similar with the sugar as well. So like the amount of sugar we extract from the grains is going to result in a different gravity depending on how much we boil off or add to the kettle. So like dilution levels. It's the same with the IBUs. So we are calculating, when we calculate IBUs, we're calculating that specific number. There's a lot of people that kind of starting to question the relevance of IBUs in the broader context of beers.
Yeah, well, obviously there's a lot to get your head around here, but the very broad overview is that the longer you boil the hops, the more bitterness you extract. But that theory is being challenged a lot at the moment with the rise of NEPAs especially, and these really late hop addition beers where they're throwing a whole ton of hops into the boil, but you're still getting bitterness. So this idea that
there's even zero IBU beers that have been made by certain breweries, so they don't boil any hops.
Yeah.
But there's still perceptible bitterness. So there are things in hops other than alpha acids which are going to provide you bitterness. But then there's also the kind of understanding that dry hopping won't give you extra bitterness to your beer. And that may be tied to the perception of bitterness. So you're getting so many fruity and interesting other flavors that maybe it masks the extra bitterness that it's adding.
The amount of plant material in those big hoppy beers too is...
There's all these different variables that come into play, and you could really lose your mind trying to juggle them all and become the perfect knower of things related to hops. But at the end of the day, I think shooting for certain IBUs within certain styles is going to consistently get you to roughly where you want to be. So it's a good tool to use to kind of...
It's something. It's a measurement. It's a yardstick. You know, so you're working off something. A lot of those calculators, the bitterness calculators, they vary quite a lot depending on whose formula you use.
And that's the other thing.
So don't, I guess,
use a piece of software for your recipe design.
Oh, someone's got no sound. Okay. It's all right. Continue. I'm getting sound.
Use a piece of software for your recipe design, and stick to that software. If you're making the same, like if you're making your recipes on different software every time, the programming of that software, the calculations they've used to get to those numbers are going to be different. So your perception of 25 IBUs might be 40 IBUs if it was actually tested in a lab. But are we getting sound?
I'm getting sound through here. We had a Facebook, someone's commented. How about guys on YouTube? Can you hear us all right? Anyone else on Facebook? Hey Ben, talking about dry hopping. Okay. So we got a question, but I think we're getting sound on YouTube. I'm not sure about Facebook. If anyone else on Facebook?
Yeah, let us know if you can hear.
Okay, it might be just Shannon then. Okay.
So your perception of this number of IBUs, and I think this is where that kind of don't use IBUs as a solid number thing comes from. But if your perception of 20 IBUs based on the program you've been using is not reproducible in a lab, it doesn't matter. Because when you're making beers and when you're making recipes, you're doing them based on your personal perception of what that bitterness level means to your palate. So you're balancing your beer from your malt, from your hops, from those sorts of things to that level. So as long as your understanding is solid, then you'll make a good beer. And no judge, no matter how good they are, is going to be able to sit there and say, nah, this is 37 IBUs, the style goes up to 35, this is out of style. It's not going to happen.
IBUs here or there, or 5 even.
It's not going to happen. So a lot of breweries now are sort of going based on grams per litre of hops. As a way to sort of measure things, and that's particularly useful if you're doing large amounts of dry hops, because you're talking about like how much the hops are contributing to the flavour and to the texture and the mouthfeel, because the oils and the hops will contribute to mouthfeel as well. If you have a really nice double IPA and it's just slick with hop oils, that's a beautiful thing.
We've got a question. This is probably a broad one. Garth is asking about dry hopping. What's your usual procedure for an IPA or similar contact time, temperature, and bagged or not? I guess that's a broad one, depending on...
Yeah, so I mean, I'm mostly into my German beers, so not a lot of dry hopping goes on there. But when I do make a hoppier beer, I tend to... It depends. If it's a NEPA, then I'll go with a High-Krausen hop and I'll do a hop a couple of days before packaging. I think they did a study a while ago that shows that the flavour and oil extraction in a dry hop doesn't really increase much past the 24 to 48 hour mark. So I just kind of figure for those dry hops, I'll give them the shortest amount of time before packaging. I'll drop them in, give them a day at room temperature, then crash chill for a day, and then package the day after that. So get it in the keg. I
used to dry hop for a week.
I started doing that, and then I read that study, and I thought if I can knock it out in 2 days, I will.
And like a lot of we talked about NEPAs before, a lot of those they have 2 dry hopping editions, but the second one is like 3 days before packaging. So I'll dry hop for maybe 3 days. just before either your bottle or your keg. 3 days is heaps, I think.
You want to give it enough time to impart the flavour and the aroma that it's going to do, and then you want to give it enough time to settle out, so you don't end up with half a keg full of hop material.
That's the other thing. So whether you bag or not bag, what do you think there?
I think it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
My first Nipah I ever brewed, I didn't bag it, and my dip tube in my keg got clogged about a third of the way through one of the most delicious beers I've ever brewed, and it was tragic. There was no way for me to get the beer out. So if you're doing a really high level of dry hopping, I think you get less flavour from a bagged dry hop, but at least you'll be able to drink the thing without chewing on it.
If you can chill your fermenter before packaging, that will help. So if you control your fermentation in a fridge and you can crash chill, that'll help drop the hops out, and then you might have a better luck transferring it to a keg without a bag.
Siphoning is a good way to do that as well. So if you've crash chilled it, the hops have settled out into the bottom of the fermenter, but maybe they're coming up to the level of your tap.
They might still come through the tap.
If you can get a siphon in on top of the sludge and hops and stuff at the bottom, and then you're pulling the beer off the top, just be mindful that when it gets down to the bottom of the siphon, you're better off pulling the hose out of your keg and stopping the siphon before it hits that point, because if it starts to suck all this air and stuff up through,
you don't want that.
In a really hoppy beer, air is the enemy. It's going to oxidize the hop flavors and you'll lose a lot of the awesomeness of it. So just be mindful of that. One way that I've seen some people do is, even if you've got if you're kegging and you've got a gas bottle, you can sort of feed a bit of CO2 into the headspace of the fermenter while it's emptying, and that's going to minimize the amount of air that comes through with your siphon as well.
Yep.
Some people go to extreme measures to limit air exposure on hoppy beers.
I've been going a bit crazy with that myself.
And why not, right? Like, it's fun. You're rigging things up, trying to come up with ways.
Once you get to a certain level in your brewing, you start looking for extra things that add to your process, I think.
It's not just making delicious beer, this hobby.
Yeah, part of it is just doing, you're just kind of like, it's tinkering, like we were saying earlier. So I've even gone to the extent of buying myself a second gas bottle, which I just use for purging and, on the brew day, all that sort of stuff. Whether it's necessary or not,
It's a good idea.
Anyway.
It's a handy thing to have a portable source of gas. So like, I make wine and cider and things like that as well. And sometimes you need to blow off some off flavors or things like that from your wine or your cider. You can carry a little bottle of gas over there, stick a hose in it, and just bubble out all the nasties that have presented themselves, and it's a really easy way to do that.
So I went through a phase of, when I started brewing, I think I did a lot of unnecessary fiddly things that probably weren't helping much in the end, but I was a bit paranoid, and so things like stirring the mash constantly, and I can't think of any other examples.
I still do that, but I know that I'm not helping.
So sometimes you just do things because it just feels like better to be doing something. And I went through a phase of actively cutting out, because I just wanted to make my days as simple as possible, and now they've kind of come full circle, and I'm reintroducing steps like purging with CO2, which take a bit longer, but I think the theory is that they all kind of help.
I think one of the things when you kind of get
the difference between something that's not a waste of time, but something that's worthwhile versus.
I think as well, once you get the mechanics of brewing kind of on lock, which maybe 10, 15 brews in, you won't even be thinking about things. You're just into the flow. The processes are just kind of ingrained in what you're doing.
You can start having a bit of brain space to expand.
Yeah. When you're first getting started, every little thing becomes like, oh, what do I do next? And then you're looking and you're checking your how to brew book, or you're like watching that YouTube video again, or you're sort of, it's a bit panicked because you don't want to miss a step, and you don't know which steps are crucial and which steps are less important.
You don't want to be a degree over or under your step, your mash temperature.
Everything becomes really sort of dire. And you like you said, it's the brain space. Like you kind of when you're on autopilot, and you should never be fully on autopilot,
Yeah,
but a
no.
lot of processes and a lot of steps become kind of autopilot to an extent.
Perhaps not the best word, but yeah.
Then you're
relaxed.
able to add extra things into that process. So like, we didn't do it today because I wanted to make this as beginner friendly as I could, which is why I was talking about hemicellulose structures and beta-glucanase
That's right,
before.
it's the,
But I wanted to make this as sort of entry level and beginner as we could, so it's approachable for people who maybe are just sort of thinking about getting into brewing, and maybe the live streaming this is sort of helping to facilitate that a little bit.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would normally do if I was brewing is at the start of the boil, I would take a gravity reading with a refractometer
Yeah.
and determine how much sugar I was able to pull out of the grains and look at what volume I have in the kettle. And from those two numbers, I can determine what my end volume needs to be in order to get the exact gravity that I want. So
Target.
if I sort of said, okay, we're sitting at 1042, and we've got 25 litres in the kettle. I want to finish with a gravity of 1048. Boil off rate's going to be this. I need, like, I can kind of know that I'm going to need to have, at the end of the boil, I don't know, 22 litres of wort in there
Yep.
to hit that exact gravity. And then I can make the adjustments that I need to. I can have some boiling water aside, the amount that I need to get to that end volume. Once the boil's finished, I can top it up to that level, let it all settle out, and then I know that I've got exactly the right gravity that I needed, that I was shooting for in the cube. And those little things, like taking those extra measurements, taking more of an active role in achieving like the specific aims that you're setting out to achieve. And then you can even go further than that. And so I had my hops measured out, like I said, but that's partly for the ease of doing this. So I'm not running off to weigh things out and stuff like that in the video. But if I was doing it at home and I wanted to be really precise, what I can do is once I've got that gravity reading, I know what my end volume is going to be, then I can calculate my IBUs based on that end volume.
Yeah.
So if I've got, maybe I designed the recipe for 20 litres, but I'm going to end up with 23 litres because I had a really efficient mash, then I can bump up the hops so that the bitterness levels and the flavour contributions are going to be in line with my initial goal. Like the balancing that I've done from like the gravity to the IBUs to all those different things is going to stay consistent.
It takes a bit of practice, a bit of knowledge of water calculations and IBUs to get to that level. So yeah, obviously when you're starting out, don't stress too much.
Dump some smashed up grains in some water at somewhere around 60-70 degrees, and you'll be fine.
Hitting your final volume, gravity's spot on. If you a few points out, I mean, I know that was a mistake, well, not a mistake I made, but being overly paranoid about
you stress about things that you don't really need to be stressing about.
We've got a couple of questions here.
Yeah, awesome.
We've just hit 12. How are you going for time with your
12:05.
12:05.
This stuff's going in.
12:05. Okay, you got a couple
I just
minutes
added a
before
little bit of
brew.
water in there
that's,
so I'm ready to go when it needs.
Brew Bright, right? If anyone
Brew
wants to
Bright
know.
and yeast nutrient.
And yeast nutrient. Okay, a couple of questions.
Yep.
This is a bit of out of left field. Brad's asking, what method do we use for barrel staves? So I guess he's talking about oaking beer. So it's a bit off topic today, but it's an interesting question.
It is.
Barrel staves
It's
and when
not-
you add them.
It's not my sort of wheelhouse, really.
Yeah.
I've never
probably
played around with
help.
oaking beers. I have oaked other things.
Yeah.
I won't elaborate, but I have oaked other things slightly stronger than beers.
Yeah.
And they're sufficiently strong that I don't need to worry about any bacteria or things that might be hiding in the wood.
Yeah, so a couple of, you got 1 minute there.
I'm just going to dump it in. It doesn't matter if
dump
it's
it
6
in,
minutes
okay,
or 11 minutes rather than 10.
So you're going to add some findings and nutrients
Some
to
findings and
boil
some
there.
nutrient.
I could probably help you out, Brad. So staves, used the right term there. Another product that's available are chips. People can use chips when making other spirit-type beverages. Chips are obviously a smaller, they're just chopped up oak. You tend to need a much shorter contact time when using oak chips, and I find the oak flavour you get from chips is a harsher has a harsher quality, so I prefer staves.
End grain wood instead of mid grain, yeah.
The bigger the wood you can use, the better. I chuck it in secondary. I use it mostly when I'm making wild sour that's kind of my jam. So I will age beers in a demijohn or a better bottle for up to a year. The amount of staves it varies. I just go by taste, so I'll add a few at the beginning of when I start aging, and I'll taste the beer every few months. If it feels like it needs more oak, I'll add a few more staves, maybe 3 or 4 staves for a 20-litre batch. But there's no real formula.
That's the crucial bit of advice, is you go based on taste. Taste and smell.
Taste and taste.
And sight to a degree as well, but when I am aging some spirits that I purchased from the spirit purveyor on some wood in my shed, which I do for fun, it really is about the sensory stuff. I tend to err on the side of caution. I'll use less wood than I think I'm going to need, and then assess it a few months in if I think I'm going to need more wood. But what's going to happen over time, and again, it'll differ slightly for lower alcohol things like beers and wines and stuff like that, but over time, different things are going to start being pulled out of the wood. So the initial period of aging, you're going to get a lot of sugars out of the wood, a lot of vanillins, those kinds of things. And as those are sort of drawn out of the wood, and as it sits there for longer, you're going to start getting more complex things, some tannic structure. You're going to get some spicy characteristics. All kinds of things are going to start coming out.
Char, depending on if it's toasted.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of, and you want that. You want that complexity, you want that depth. So if you've got too much oak in there initially, you're going to get so much tannin and it's going to be like black tea, which is not what you want. So playing it on the conservative side, and then you can always adjust as you go, is a good plan. So I happened to come across some apple brandy, which somebody other than myself had produced. And I wanted to age, like this was clear apple brandy, they hadn't been aged. I found a still on the side of the road that someone had obviously abandoned, and there was some delicious... I determined through my observation skills that it was apple that had been the fermentable that had created the delicious brandy that I was now looking at, clear and clean and beautiful. I thought it'd be really cool if I used apple wood to age it instead of oak. So I got my hands on some apple wood from a barbecue place. Chopped it up with a hatchet because you're better off chopping with the grain with an axe or a hatchet than you are like chipping. And I played around with different toasting temperatures and times. So I had these little blocks that I'd chopped up, wrapped them in foil, poked a few holes for it to steam off, and I toasted one of them at, I think, 180, one of them was at 210, 220, somewhere around there, for about an hour, and the other one was at 160, 170, I think, for about the same. I can't remember exact timings and temperatures. I found a few charts online and kind of went based on those for the types of flavors you get from oak specifically at different temperatures and times. So the darker toasted one had lots of vanilla, lots of sugar. It really reminded me of toasted oak. And the less toasted, like the paler one, had lots of fruity, appley kind of character to it. and a bit of colour. So I put both of those in there, left it for about, or it's still in there, but I've started tasting now at about the 6-month mark. It's coming on 8 months now. It's really starting to get delicious.
Yeah.
And that was about the right amount. I also happened to come across, on another one of my journeys, a glass jar full of what I determined to be whiskey on some detailed analysis. I go out, I walk around, and these things just, I know where to look. The key is knowing where to look. And I had a toasted French oak stave in there, which I thought would be enough for the amount that I had. But after a few months, it became really clear that the color wasn't right. I wasn't getting enough on the nose. So I put an extra stave in there to help it along. And now that extra stave is in there, it's definitely developing and turning into what I was hoping it was going to turn into. So I think being able to use your senses and make decisions based on that is really crucial, because the other thing is, like we were saying before, it's down to your personal preferences. You're trying to produce something for yourself, probably for other people as well, but you want to make the thing that you really want to drink.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is by making it to your taste.
Yeah,
so training your senses, training your nose, your taste buds, your eye, and lots of practice, you'll start to sort of build up those skills and that ability.
So to quickly summarise, beers you can age. So big beers, barley wines, obviously, any your Russian Imperial stouts. Ben's been talking about spirits, of course, but they lend themselves really well to oaking. So the longer you can let them age, it gives you time to adjust as you go. But you can, do it quick and dirty, for lack of a better term. Oaked beer, if you want to just throw some oak into the boil. I've done that before on actually, funnily enough, an Irish Red I made years ago. Just chucked in, it was chips actually at that point. I can't remember how many I used, but I put them in the last maybe 5 minutes of the boil.
Yeah.
And it was super over, like out of the bottle initially, it was like sucking on an oak chip. But it aged out really quickly. So by 2 or 3 months, which is usually, when bottled beers, conditioned beers hit their peak, it was really nice, actually. And then it just dropped off the cliff. And that could have been my practices more than anything, but then you couldn't taste the oak at all after 4 months. So that was an interesting experiment. So play with your oak, Brad.
Yeah, and a lot of people, in terms of sanitizing it before you add it in, if you are going to add it in the fermenter, a lot of people steam it.
Yep. Give it a boil.
It's probably the most common way. Even soaking. So like if you wanted to add a spirit flavour to the beer as well. So say you wanted to do a bourbon oaked imperial stout. Soak it in some bourbon. Get some bourbon. Stick your oak in there for a few days. The alcohol proof is going to kill off any bacteria that might be hiding in the wood. And it'll also take on the flavour of the spirit that you're soaking it in, and then you can throw it in. So I had a rum soaked oak porter a while ago that was bloody delicious. So yeah, play around.
Yeah,
have
play
fun.
around. Yeah. So let's. They've got a few more questions. We're sorry, guys.
Oh, good. Yeah, we're kind of rambling and going off on tangents.
But yeah, oak is a good topic to talk about. We got let's see. Maybe quickly. Brad again has asked, do we recommend boil times for longer than 69 minutes? 60 minutes.
69.
Nice. Typo there. 60 minutes.
Can.
Yeah, 90 minutes is, again, that's not unheard of.
It's really common. A lot of people talk about, I'm just going to switch this off actually, it's pretty much done. 4, 3, 2, we're at about 21 and a half, 22 litres, so maybe a little bit boiled down lower than I was hoping, but that's all right.
A little bit lower than you were.
If the cube isn't completely full,
there.
then so be it.
Okay,
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to whirlpool this. I will answer that question, because we've got about 5 or 10 minutes of this whirlpooling before we fill it.
What you're doing there, because this is kind of.
So I really want to get this, spinning around. And and then we're going to chuck the lid on. So that swirling motion with the steam coming up, hitting the lid and coming back down, it's going to get like a convection current going in there. And what we're hoping is those findings that we threw in before are going to bind to all the proteins, hot matter, things like that, and form clumps, get really heavy, and sink to the bottom of the kettle. And with that convection current, we're hoping that the whirlpool kind of forms it into a nice little cone at the bottom. So we've got our tap here, and we're pulling not from the cone, but from to the side of the cone, so we're getting a nice clear work coming into our cube.
Try and get some footage of that when you...
We'll see, now that we're filming it, it won't work.
no, that's right.
But it'll be the first time it hasn't worked. If it doesn't work, but I know it doesn't always work.
No, I always have trouble with my whirlpools. I think it's just how my pot is, the elements and stuff get in the way, but yeah, I know it's a common
And this pot does have a big old hole in the lid here too, so I don't know if that steam escaping is going to impact it at all. But what was the question again?
Boils longer
Boils,
than
yes.
60 minutes.
So a lot of books you'll read will talk about the absolutely vital necessity of doing a 90-minute boil whenever you're using European Pilsner malt. Because, and one thing that we didn't even touch on with the boil, never boil with your lid on.
Yeah.
Always take the lid off. Because there's compounds that you're trying to evaporate, and if the lid's on, they'll recondense and drop back into your beer. One of them being dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, which is like, everyone always describes it as creamed corn or vegetal. And I always kind of went with that, and I sort of roughly knew what it was. But I did a doctored beer tasting recently where the person running it said crustaceans.
Really?
And as soon as she said that, my brain clicked, and I was like, yes, that's exactly the thing that I've been like, so our perceptual sets, like the way that our brains perceive different chemical compounds and label them, is based on our experience up to that point. So for a lot of people, creamed corn is the perfect descriptor, and that will just click straight away in their brain. But for me, it was crustaceans like crab, prawn, those sorts of flavors. And as soon as I had that in my head, I can get it every time now. So a lot of times it's just finding whatever descriptor that clicks with your brain.
Yeah. What about seafood filler? Do you think that?
Yeah, maybe. More prawn.
Yeah.
I think more prawn is the sort of the way to think of it.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. I often have trouble getting my brain to connect. I should do one of those courses. They sound like they're...
It's really, really good to be able, to know for a fact that it's diacetyl that's in there,
what you think it is,
and then apply the flavour that you're familiar with, that you associate with it, and then link that together in your brain, and then every time you notice it, your brain will link it to that thing.
Yeah, totally.
But yes, DMS. Yep. So it used to be just commonly held belief that you need to boil Pilsner malt for 90 minutes in order to drive off DMS, because the amount of DMS in Pilsner malt is much higher, or the precursor at least of DMS was much higher in Pilsner malt. I brew mostly German beers. Most of them use a very high percentage of Pilsner malt, and I've never done a 90-minute boil, and I've never run into DMS issues. So I wouldn't stress about it too much. That said, if you're particularly sensitive to DMS and you're noticing it, doing a 90-minute boil will help to drive more of that off. So that may be something that you decide to take on as a way to make your beers more palatable to you. But I wouldn't stress too much.
Yeah, it's one of those things you don't need to. Give it a shot. If you think it helps, by all means do it, but it's probably not, it's not like a rule we have to follow.
No. The other thing I would suggest is certain beer styles ask for an extended boil for different reasons. They want to encourage kettle caramelization and sort of building of depth and complexity through the extended boiling of the sugars. Wee Heavy or Scotch Ale is a classic example of that. Going back to Mike Leslie from before, I remember when he brewed a barley wine here, 100% Marisota, and boiled it for something ridiculous like 8 or 9 hours.
Oh wow!
Boiled it down to like a third of the volume, and then fermented it, and that was probably the single greatest big boozy beer.
Yeah.
The way I described it when he brought it in was, it's like, it doesn't matter what is wrong with you, this is the medicine that's going to fix it.
Yeah, right.
It was phenomenal.
You're developing a lot of Malinois.
Oh,
of course.
so many. And
it's not
caramel.
just about
Caramel that isn't from
juicing.
crystal malt, like
Yeah.
kettle caramelization, it gives you a different caramel character
Mm.
than crystal malt. So I tried a hack with that, with a wee heavy that I did at a demo here a while ago, whereby I pulled off 3 litres of wort from the kettle at the start of the boil in a separate pot and boiled that over the course of the hour with the rest of the kettle, and that boiled down to like a really thick reduced syrup.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I added that syrup back into the beer. So I was getting that extra caramelization and that extra sort of reduction of those flavors without having to boil for such an extended period of time. And that was a really awesome way to achieve some of that as well. So there's all these little hacks that you can come up with. And if you sort of know what the processes are that you're trying to emulate, it gives you an opportunity to sort of come up with creative ways to achieve it.
Yeah.
Which is really fun.
Again, just something to play with.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple more. So Joey, I hope you're still here, Joey. You asked this question a while ago.
Sorry,
I think it's
Joey.
all right. No, we've been doing our best. What do we consider as the best brew in a bag system in the market right now? Well, that's again a pretty the one you can afford, I think.
Yeah, or the one you've got the space for, or the one that is an appropriate volume for your individual needs.
Brew in a bag is one of those things where the equipment isn't such, anything you can bring a volume of what I'm just going to get a camera angle of it.
Yeah, sorry. I keep forgetting there's not a crowd of people that can change the direction that they're looking while I'm doing this.
It's less about brands and just about what works for you, what your budget you can afford. What we're using here is an urn with basically a digital thermostat.
And I'm still using an old school analog thermometer to check the temps.
We're still using a thermometer to check the the temperature. Anyway, but you can use a pot stove, a big old pot with a burner on the outside. That's what I used to do when I started brewing. So really, it's what works best for you. Electric is good. If you're concerns about gas, running out of gas can be a pain in the middle of a brew.
The trade-off tends to be, I think, gas is a lot quicker at heating things. So if you've got a direct flame, you'll get to your temperatures and you'll heat up to where you need to be a lot faster than electric, generally speaking, depending on how powerful your elements are. But electric is a lot more controllable. So you can kind of tweak things a little bit more precisely, fine-tune things. You can run digital thermostats to control where temperatures are going, and there's a lot more sort of degree of sort of control and finesse that you can apply to electric.
Yeah, I find it a bit easier what I've used. And James asked about books again. Maybe we'll get to that again. We covered that earlier, but we'll.
You got to read theory.
Yeah, totally. We'll answer that question at the end, James. I'll quickly just let you know. The two we mentioned were How to Brew by John Palmer and Brewing Classic Styles by John Palmer and Jamil Zainasheff. They're two really good books to get you started. And we'll mention those again at the end if you didn't quite catch that.
For starting out, they're the two. But then there's some really awesome really stuff out there. There's like whole books devoted to a single style of beer, which is like just my absolute dream. I love styles.
Yeah.
I love because I'm a history nerd. I love looking into the history of styles, how they came to be, and all the kind of stuff surrounding, which we didn't really cover today with the Irish Red Ale. Partly because the Irish Red Ale doesn't really have that interesting a history.
Yeah, right.
It was just kind of the session beer of Ireland.
Yeah.
So like England had their pale ales, and Ireland sort of, because of the way they malted, because of the water was usually quite a bit more carbonate heavy.
Yeah.
They used darker malts in order to acidify the mash. They didn't know that was why they were doing it, but they found that when they used darker malts, the beers didn't turn out quite so bad.
Common story.
So it's just kind of their session beer, their easy drinking pale ale kind of equivalent in Ireland.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
there's not too much history that goes into it.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Irish Reds myself, except for Kilkenny. That's
It's a bloody delicious beer.
Kilkenny is. So what we've done here, well, Ben's done, is we've attached the hose to the ball valve. You've chucked a clamp on there just to get a good seal.
We don't want the hose flinging off and swinging around and spraying us with boiling hot wort.
And it's just going straight into the
In the cube. And everything's been sanitized. Inside of the cube, the hose, everything's been sanitized. Some people take it a step further, soak a tea towel in sanitizer and put that over the hole. I'm not that worried because I've got a sanitized cube with boiling hot wort running through a sanitized hose. So the combination of the heat and the sanitizer should be enough to cover any dramas. Because I'm going to seal up the cube afterwards as well, and the steam that's in there is going to pretty much kill anything else that might be alive in there. So I am just going to call that as 10 minutes since we whirlpooled. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, that feels about right. I reckon
it feels about the right amount of time for me to start filling it. So I'm going to do that. Again, some people run it nice and slow. I am impatient.
Yeah.
I just let it blast in there. I want to feel it.
Yeah, so I would, one of the things I've been doing, I would purge that with CO2 these days.
Which we used to do for the
given
work.
the time
We
and
used to
the,
do that for the work kits as well. We used to purge them all individually with CO2 and sanitize them all individually and added a few hours to the brew day when you're doing 50, 60 cubes.
Like all these little steps add up. So,
but we have experimented with a few different things and we've kind of got it now to the point where, thankfully for the people that are brewing, we don't have to individually purge and sanitize 60 cubes, 70 cubes on a brew day. This is filling up all right. I don't know what the level's like in there. Oh yeah, I've still got plenty of wort. I reckon we're going to be fine with filling this. Shouldn't have said that. I've jinxed it.
Don't jinx it.
Never express confidence in anything ever.
Yeah, no, not live anyway, not live on camera. Joey's asked if you had, I think $2,000, is it $2,000 to invest? What kind of system would you spend it on for a 10-gallon system? 10 gallons, you might be, are you
10 gallon is...
how many litres is that?
1 gallon's like 4 litres, right?
Something like that, or is it 3?
So say like a 40 litre system. If I had 2,000 and I was wanting to get a 40 litre system, I don't know.
I mean,
if it is American and it's 2,000 American dollars, I would get a Brewmeister. I'd save up a little bit more cash and get a Brewmeister, and then you never have to buy another system.
So depending on where you're located, Joey, $2,000. Yeah, a little bit more than that, you can get yourself a Brewmeister all the way. That's what I would do. But there are plenty cheaper.
Well, I mean, that's what you did do.
Well, that's what I did. That is what I did, literally. Yeah. But there are cheaper systems out there if you wanted to save a bit of money. But if you've got the money to burn,
it really, like we were sort of mentioning before briefly, like it really comes down to your individual needs and what you want to get out of brewing. If your sort of main concern is consistency, then something like a Brewmeister is going to be perfect because it's automated. If your main concern is being able to tinker and fiddle with things and put things in, pull things out of the system, then maybe the answer is going to be buying individual parts and sort of building a Franken brewery yourself, which is a lot of fun. And there's also space as a consideration. I guess like something like a Brewmeister or like a brew in a bag system is great because it only takes up the footprint of the single vessel. Whereas if you've got a massive brewing space and you want to have a big, massive, intimidating looking, shiny thing in there to impress your friends, then maybe a massive gravity-fed 3-vessel system like I've got at home might be really
Get
cool.
yourself a Hermes
Or even like some of the what's the brand? Blickman. Blickman do some really
Blickman,
cool
they got some not really
3-vessel pump
vessels.
fed
And they got single vessel
systems.
systems too, that they're kind of prefabricated things there.
So we don't stock Blickman here, and they are a fair bit pricier as well. But you'd probably get a 40-gallon system for
If they're in the
about
States, it will be cheapest.
2,000 American, because you're not having to spend the cost to ship it over to Australia. But yeah, you probably get something around that size of pretty high quality through that if you're over in the States. And that's if you want sort of like one of those kind of more. There we go.
So you can see this part of the process, it gets a little messy. So you want to do it.
Wear gloves.
Yeah, wear gloves.
Because right now I'm holding a hose that's just been in boiling hot liquid. But like I mentioned before, I'm a bit of a fuel. I'll run this straight over to the sink. And we'll rinse it in a sec. I'll get the lid on this, which is sitting in the sanitizer.
As you can see, it's pretty much full to the brim. So
we want to get as much of the. What I should have done then is pulled the hose out of there a little bit and then unhooked it from there. Because what happened is as soon as I unhooked it, the hose displaced some of the liquid. So that's bubbled back up out of the cube. I was hoping that the liquid that was in the hose would fill it right up to the very brim of the cube, but it doesn't really matter. It's full enough. It's up in the neck of the cube. There's pretty much 17 litres of wort in there, boiling hot, sterilising all the inside of that. So anything that was alive in there no longer is. And that's what we want. And this will just basically sit and come to room temperature over, say, 24 hours, 12 to 24 hours. Just what we want. Once it's there, then we can pour it into a fermenter, throw some yeast at it. I'm going to use Y-Yeast 1084 Irish Ale yeast on this. If you are more comfortable with dry yeast, Nottingham would go amazingly in this sort of beer as well. You want like a fairly clean fermenting yeast that's going to give you a little bit of
express the malt.
So going to bring the malt out. Ferment fairly dry, but also give slight hint of esters to let you know it's an ale. But you want this is a beer that you want to be really clean. It's not like like an English bitter or something like that, where you're going to want those like pear, peach sort of esters coming from the yeast to give complexity and depth and stuff. You want. A lot of people will actually ferment this with a lager yeast and just do it as a lager. It's a really common thing. And being me, I'm surprised I'm not going to
right.
Something like a 2206 would be amazing in this sort of beer, which is the Y-Yeast Bavarian lager yeast. It gives, like, supercharges the malt character of whatever you ferment with it. And I think that would be amazing in an Irish red. Maybe I'll do that. As I'm talking about it, I'm like, that'd be good.
Yourself.
But it's a little bit more work, a little bit more
you
time involved in lager fermentation, and I'm pretty keen to get this one drinking. So I might forego that in favour of the Irish ale. But yeah, that's basically
That's pretty much it. You got your cube, done, and then it's just clean up, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's not much to do. This is all I've got to clean now because I've been cleaning as I went. It's just a matter of draining out the leftover wort and the sludge in the bottom, giving it a quick hose out with the pressure washer.
One of the big advantages of no chilling is just the less gear, less time, just clean up. Yeah.
And then I'll probably just fill maybe up to about here, so it's over the elements with hot water. Put a bit of OxyClean in there and just give it a bit of a soak so that any sugar and stuff that's cooked onto the element just gets dissolved and broken down. And then it'll be ready to go for next time we need to use it.
Yeah.
That's
just quickly, Dave, Deep Spring Farm has just tuned in and they've got a question about whether you have to make adjustments for hop additions given it's no chill. In this beer, not really.
Again, going back to your perception of what 20 IBUs is, if you dial in your kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Calibration. If you dial in your hop calibration to no chill brewing, you'll just know where it needs to be to get the balance that you're shooting for.
Takes a bit of practice. It's not, but you're not going to...
But that's with any type of brewing. It's going to take you a few brews to dial everything in. I've been doing no chill since I started, which is over a decade now, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I just know what kind of bitterness I'm going to get if I'm shooting for a certain IBU level. And with this one, like I put them in at the start of the boil, it's going to cool down. Like isomerization keeps happening down to about 80 degrees. So I might get a tiny bit of isomerization, but it's middle of winter. This is already cooling down. So it's only going to be over 80 for maybe an hour or two.
A few IBUs difference.
And every degree it drops, the amount of isomerization that's occurring in there is going to reduce as well. I've never found the need to adjust my brewing practices to deal with that. But, I mean, some people might.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. What do you reckon, guys?
Should we call it a stream?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've covered all the basics. How's the? Do we get a good hop cone in there?
Good question.
Maybe just check before we. Can you see anything?
It is a little bit fluffy around the top, and I think part of that is it's definitely formed, but it's just a little fluffy around the top because we've gone below the peak of the cone now. So it's kind of dispersed into the liquid as it's dropped, but you can still definitely see there is space between the inlet of the tap and the cone itself. It's going to be really hard to see because of the steam.
Yeah,
I'll
it
try
may not be very good, but you can kind of see the darker work, which is clear. Oh, now the camera's going to fog up.
Yeah.
That's probably a bit of a fail. But,
sorry, guys.
Maybe you'll get the picture.
But yeah, the cone's definitely formed, and there's definitely a gap of about 5-ish centimeters, I reckon, from the inlet of the tap to the formation of the cone. So we could have, there's still a bit of wort in there actually. We did all right.
Yeah, looks like we hit everything on.
So and we finished pretty close to 20 liters as well. 21, 22 liters. So pretty much what I planned on, like what I calculated for, was what happened. We didn't measure the gravity. It's like I said, trying to keep it simple. But I am fairly confident from years of doing these brew in a bag brews that it'll be pretty much what I planned it for. Nothing seemed to go wrong. The only sort of slight variable was that we were using flaked oats, which I don't often use unmalted grains in beer, so that might have thrown off the efficiency a tiny bit, but I'm pretty confident with a 67 degree mash, decent amount of base malt, that we'll be where we need to be.
Yeah, good. Awesome.
It was awesome. That was fun.
Yeah, I think that was a success. We didn't have any disasters that were caught on tape, so I think that was a win.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out, guys.
Thanks for your questions. Just thanks for watching, guys. Cheers. Cheers to everyone. Take care out there.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, bye-bye.